The courtroom was buzzing with a low murmur as the spectators settled into their seats, their eyes drawn to the young woman entering through the heavy door. Emily Harper, a determined 19-year-old attorney, stepped in with a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with the skepticism of those around her. The officer on the witness stand, Officer Thompson, a seasoned cop in his mid-40s, leaned back casually, clearly unimpressed by the sight of the petite figure in front of him. He assumed she was simply a law student here to observe. As Emily walked up to the defense table, her sneakers squeaked softly against the polished floor. She was not late. She had arrived precisely 3 minutes early, a deliberate choice that allowed her to make an entrance without rushing. Dressed in a pair of black Converse, charcoal trousers from a secondhand store, and a slightly worn navy blazer with the sleeves rolled up, she exuded a blend of professionalism and youthfulness. She sported no makeup and no jewelry, choosing instead to embrace her natural look. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Mitchell, an older man with a silver beard, looked up from his notes as Emily took her place at the defense table. Without uttering a word, she opened her binder and flipped to the tab labeled Cross-Examination. The other attorney, who had been expecting a more seasoned opponent, glanced over in confusion, raising an eyebrow at her certainty. Ma'am, this table is for legal counsel," he stammered. "I am counsel," she replied succinctly, her focus unwavering. He hesitated, unsure whether to laugh or feel concerned. Just then, Officer Thompson broke the silence with a derisive chuckle. "Is this some kind of student court program?" he sneered, leaning towards the officer beside him, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "What is this, debate club?" A few scattered laughs echoed from the benches, but Emily remained unfazed. She clicked her pen, jotting a single note in her binder, and waited for the judge's cue. "Let's proceed," Judge Mitchell announced, his tone laced with uncertainty over whether this was a prank. Rising with poise, Emily spoke clearly. "Your Honor, the defense is ready for cross-examination." Curiosity piqued. A few eyebrows in the courtroom were raised. Officer Thompson leaned back again but narrowed his eyes, perhaps beginning to sense that this young woman might have a surprising depth to her. As she moved toward the witness stand, Emily maintained a steady demeanor, embodying the confidence of someone far beyond her years. It was as if she had been preparing for this moment her entire life, despite it only being her third time in open court. The tension in the room began to shift, and the audience leaned in, intrigued by the unfolding drama. It was clear that Emily was not merely there to defend her client. She was poised to challenge the very foundations of the case against him. As she prepared to question Officer Thompson, the atmosphere in the courtroom thickened with anticipation, setting the stage for an unforgettable confrontation. If this story resonates with you, consider sharing it or speaking out against injustice. Every voice matters, and together we can foster a culture of accountability and fairness. Emily stood confidently at the podium, her binder open in front of her, ready to challenge Officer Thompson. "Officer Thompson," she began, her voice steady, "how long have you been on the force?" He smirked, leaning back slightly. 23 years. "Great," Emily replied, her pen poised over her notes. "That means you're familiar with the standard procedures during routine traffic stops, correct?" "Of course," he said, a hint of arrogance in his tone. "Excellent," she said, flipping through her binder. "I'd like to discuss the stop involving my client, Mr. Jason Lee, on April 6th. The courtroom shifted and the audience sat up straighter, sensing the tension building. Officer Thompson rolled his neck, preparing for what he assumed would be a brief and uneventful exchange. "You mean the guy who ran a stop sign and got mouthy?" Thompson replied, a cocky smile on his face. "Yes," Emily confirmed, maintaining eye contact. "The man you pulled over at approximately 4:17 p.m. on Maple Avenue, who you stated was acting suspicious and argumentative. Correct?" Thompson nodded, still exuding confidence. "That's right." Emily paused for a moment, allowing the weight of her next question to settle in the air. "Did you have your body camera activated during that stop?" "Of course," he replied, his bravado unshaken. "Was the footage submitted to the case file?" she pressed, her tone unwavering. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, turning to Judge Mitchell. "With your permission, I would like to reference the officer's own footage in my line of questioning." The judge nodded slowly, granting her request. The atmosphere in the courtroom shifted as Emily referenced the footage. Officer Thompson's smile faded slightly as she began to dissect his report. "You stated in your report that the driver failed to stop at the stop sign. Do you recall writing that?" "Yep," he said, his voice now tinged with uncertainty. "And the stop sign in question is at the corner of Maple and Oak Street?" Emily continued, pressing on. "Yes." "You mentioned you were parked facing east on Maple Avenue when you initiated the stop. Is that correct?" "That's right." Emily stepped to the side, holding up a printout from the body cam footage. "This is a still image from your own camera, time-stamped at 4 hours, 16 minutes, and 49 seconds p.m. It shows your vehicle facing east with 2 cars partially obstructing the view of the stop sign on Oak Street. Can you confirm? Thompson leaned forward, his expression shifting from confidence to concern. Well, yeah, maybe 2 cars were there. Not maybe, Emily replied firmly. They were there. At that angle, could you clearly see whether my client came to a full stop? He hesitated, realizing he was being cornered. I judged it the best I could, he mumbled. Not what I asked, Officer Thompson. Could you clearly see it? Not completely, no, he admitted, his voice losing its earlier bravado. Emily turned to the judge, her expression calm yet resolute. Noted. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as the audience absorbed the implications of Thompson's admission. Emily was methodically dismantling the officer's testimony, and it was clear that the tide was turning in her favor. As she continued her cross-examination, the atmosphere shifted from one of skepticism to rapt attention, with even the opposing counsel leaning in, captivated by the unfolding drama. As Emily continued her cross-examination, she felt the energy in the courtroom shift. She had Officer Thompson on the ropes, and she intended to make the most of it. Officer Thompson, she began, her tone steady, in your report you stated that the driver was acting suspicious. Can you explain what specific behaviors led you to that conclusion? Thompson shifted uncomfortably. He was fidgeting and looking around, he replied defensively. Emily nodded, noting the tension in his posture. Did he ever raise his voice at you during the stop? No, he admitted, his confidence waning. Did he threaten you or show any sign of aggression? No, he said again, fidgeting in his seat. Emily paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch out as the courtroom absorbed the implications of his responses. So, to be clear, your conclusion that he was acting suspicious was based solely on the fact that he was fidgeting? Thompson shifted again, glancing around the room as if seeking support from the spectators. Look, I've been on the force long enough to know when something's off, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. Emily pressed on, her calm demeanor contrasting sharply with the growing unease of the officer. Did you conduct any field sobriety tests on Mr. Lee? No, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Did you request a drug screening? No. Then on what basis did you determine he was probably high? Emily's voice remained even, but the intensity of her questioning was palpable. Thompson swallowed hard, clearly struggling to maintain his composure as the courtroom watched intently. I just had a feeling, he finally muttered. A feeling? Emily echoed, her brow furrowing in disbelief. You stopped, searched, and cited my client based on a feeling? He opened his mouth to respond but faltered, unable to find the words. Emily seized the moment, taking a step closer to the witness stand as if to emphasize her point. Your report also mentioned that you observed a bag under the passenger seat and suspected it contained contraband. How did you observe that? I saw something dark under there, Thompson replied, trying to sound authoritative. A shadow? Emily challenged. Did you ever actually point a flashlight or crouch down to get a better look? I assumed it was a bag, he stammered, but I might have been mistaken. Emily let that statement hang in the air, allowing the weight of it to settle over the courtroom. Maybe you were, she said quietly, returning to the defense table with a sense of purpose. The tension was thick as Emily turned back to face the witness. Officer Thompson, in your 23 years on the force, have you ever been formally disciplined for misconduct? His jaw tightened, and he hesitated before answering. Yes, once, 10 years ago. What was the nature of that discipline? Thompson glanced nervously at the prosecutor, but Judge Mitchell interrupted, his voice firm. Answer the question, officer. Excessive force complaint. It was dropped, Thompson replied, his voice barely audible. Thank you, Emily said, her tone still composed. She glanced at the gallery, where the audience was now fully engaged, their attention riveted on the unfolding drama. She sensed the shift in the atmosphere. The tide was turning, and Officer Thompson's confidence was eroding with every question she posed. As Emily continued to dissect his testimony, it became increasingly clear that his credibility was crumbling under the weight of her scrutiny. The spectators leaned in closer, some exchanging glances of surprise and disbelief as Emily expertly navigated through the evidence, revealing the flaws in Thompson's account. The courtroom was now a stage, and she was commanding the attention of everyone present, making it evident that the truth was about to rise to the surface. Emily sensed the momentum shifting in her favor as she continued her cross-examination, and she was determined to capitalize on it. Officer Thompson, she said, her voice steady, you mentioned earlier that you had been disciplined for excessive force 10 years ago. Can you tell us what that incident involved? He hesitated, his confidence visibly shaken. It was a complaint that was ultimately dropped, he replied defensively, but the edge in his voice was gone. Just to clarify, Emily pressed, this was a formal complaint regarding your use of excessive force, is that correct? Yes, he admitted, his eyes darting around the courtroom as if searching for an escape. Emily leaned slightly forward, her gaze unwavering. So, you have a history of being scrutinized for your actions on the job. How does that affect your judgment during stops like the one involving Mr. Lee? Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly uneasy under the spotlight. I've learned from my mistakes, he stammered, but his lack of conviction was evident. Let's examine the specifics of the stop, Emily continued, her voice calm yet commanding. In your report, you stated that Mr. Lee was acting suspiciously, but you also admitted that he never raised his voice, never threatened you, and never refused to comply. Is that correct? Yes, he replied, his tone now more subdued. Emily smiled slightly, sensing that she was closing in on him. And you also mentioned in your report that you observed him fidgeting. Is it safe to say that your assessment was based on subjective feelings rather than concrete evidence? Thompson squirmed in his chair, the walls of his defense crumbling. I just know what I've seen over the years, he muttered, but Emily wasn't letting him off the hook. Yet you didn't conduct any sobriety tests, and you didn't ask Mr. Lee a single question about why he was driving that day, did you? She countered, her tone unwavering. Thompson opened his mouth to respond but fell silent. The courtroom was electric, the audience hanging on Emily's every word as she meticulously unraveled the officer's testimony. She was methodically building a case not just for her client but against systemic biases. You stated in your report that you fit the type of someone who might be hiding something. Can you explain to the court what that means? Emily pressed, her voice firm. Thompson's face flushed, and for the first time he looked vulnerable. I meant that sometimes people act nervous during traffic stops, he said, trying to regain his composure. Officer, Emily said, her tone sharp, none of those behaviors you described are illegal. In fact, your own department's policy states that all stops must be based on observable behavior, not assumptions or feelings. You didn't see a weapon or any contraband during the stop, did you? No, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Your Honor, Emily called out, turning to Judge Mitchell. It's clear that this stop lacked any legal justification. Officer Thompson misrepresented his observations and acted on subjective bias rather than following proper procedure. Judge Mitchell nodded slowly, acknowledging the weight of her argument. Emily returned her focus to the courtroom, where the tension was palpable. She had successfully highlighted the officer's inconsistencies, and the audience was now fully aware of the implications of his testimony. With one last question hanging in the air, Emily's gaze locked onto Thompson's. This isn't just about my client, Officer Thompson. It's about accountability and the standards we expect from those in law enforcement. The room held its breath as she paused, allowing the gravity of her words to resonate. Emily had not only dismantled a case, she had laid bare the systemic issues that often go unchallenged. With the tension in the courtroom reaching a boiling point, Emily felt the eyes of everyone present fixed on her. She had navigated the complexities of Officer Thompson's testimony with precision, and now it was time to deliver the final blow. Taking a deep breath, she addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, I have one last question for Officer Thompson. The courtroom fell silent, all attention drawn back to the witness stand. Emily turned her focus back to Thompson, who was visibly sweating under the scrutiny. Officer Thompson, did you know that my client Jason Lee is a high school math teacher at Lincoln Middle School? The question caught him off guard. No, I didn't ask, he replied, his voice shaky. Emily leaned in slightly, her expression serious. So, to be clear, you conducted a stop, a search, and issued a citation based solely on a rolling stop you couldn't clearly see, a bag you assumed was contraband, and a nervous gesture you attributed to something illegal, all without asking Jason a single question about where he was coming from or where he was going. Thompson shifted uncomfortably, his bravado all but evaporated. That's not exactly how it went, he began to protest, but Emily gently cut him off. But it is, she stated firmly, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. You saw a young black man in a hoodie driving an older car and decided that he fit a stereotype. You didn't ask him anything. You didn't bother to learn his story. Instead, you relied on your assumptions. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. The spectators, who had been leaning in to witness the unfolding drama, now exchanged glances of disbelief and concern. Emily could feel the weight of her words settling over the room, creating a palpable shift in the atmosphere. I'm not asking for sympathy here, Emily continued, her voice calm but resolute. I'm asking for justice. This case isn't merely about a traffic violation. It's about the harmful assumptions that lead to profiling and unjust treatment. With that, Emily turned to the jury, her gaze piercing as she addressed them directly. Every aspect of this courtroom is governed by rules, legal procedures, and accountability. How can we allow an officer to disregard these standards based solely on a feeling? That should concern all of us. The jurors appeared engaged, their expressions reflecting the impact of her words. Emily could see that they were beginning to understand the broader implications of the case. She took a moment to let her message resonate before continuing. Officer Thompson has been on the force for 23 years, but what troubles me most is the confidence he displayed, believing he could act without accountability. How many others have suffered because of similar assumptions? She questioned, her voice rising slightly with emotion. As she returned to her seat, the tension in the room remained thick. Emily had managed to highlight not just the flaws in Thompson's actions, but also the systemic issues that permeated law enforcement practices. The audience was left in a state of contemplation, understanding that the outcome of this case extended far beyond the courtroom walls. Judge Mitchell cleared his throat, signaling a transition. "Miss Harper, you've made your points clear. We will now proceed to closing arguments." The energy in the room had shifted. Emily had not only defended her client, but had also ignited a conversation about justice, bias, and accountability that would linger long after the trial was over. As the courtroom settled into a hushed anticipation, Emily prepared for the closing arguments. The tension was palpable, and she could feel the weight of her responsibility resting on her shoulders. She stood up slowly, taking a moment to gather her thoughts before addressing the jury. This was her chance to drive home everything she had meticulously laid out during the trial. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Emily began, her voice steady yet passionate. "What you have witnessed in this courtroom over the past few days is not just a case about a traffic stop. It is a reflection of a larger issue that impacts our society. This case is about accountability, justice, and the very principles that underpin our legal system." She took a moment to glance at Officer Thompson, who sat at the witness stand with a look of tension etched across his face. "You heard Officer Thompson's own admissions. He acted on assumptions, relying on feelings rather than facts. He stopped my client, Jason Lee, based on nothing more than a stereotype and a hunch. This is not how our system is supposed to work." Emily's voice rose with conviction as she continued. "Think back to the evidence presented. Officer Thompson did not ask Mr. Lee a single question about his situation. He didn't take the time to understand who he was stopping. Instead, he made a snap judgment based on a preconceived notion of what a suspicious person looks like. This is not just an isolated incident, it's indicative of a troubling pattern that we must confront." The jurors were leaning forward now, visibly engaged. Emily could see the understanding dawning in their eyes, and it fueled her resolve. Every day, people like Jason are subjected to unfair treatment based on their appearance, their race, or their socioeconomic status. We cannot allow this to continue. We must hold our law enforcement accountable for their actions. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. Justice is not merely about winning cases, it is about ensuring that the truth prevails and that every person is treated with dignity and respect. If we allow this kind of behavior to go unchecked, we are doing a disservice not only to Mr. Lee but to our entire community. Turning her attention back to the evidence, she added, "The body camera footage clearly shows that Officer Thompson's actions were not supported by any legal grounds. He failed to follow department protocols, which are put in place to protect citizens from unwarranted searches and stops. This is not just about one individual, it's about the integrity of our justice system." Emily concluded her remarks with a powerful, "I urge you to reflect on the evidence and the implications of your decision. It is time to stand for what is right. It is time to deliver a verdict that not only exonerates Jason Lee, but sends a message that we will not tolerate injustice. Every person deserves the benefit of the doubt and the right to be treated fairly under the law." As she returned to her seat, Emily felt a sense of determination radiate from the jury. She had not only defended her client, but had also sparked a conversation that transcended the courtroom. The silence that followed her closing argument spoke volumes. The impact of her words would resonate long after the trial concluded. After Emily's powerful closing argument, the atmosphere in the courtroom was charged with anticipation. The jury was sent to deliberate, and as they filed out, Emily felt a wave of adrenaline course through her. She turned to Jason Lee, who sat quietly at the defense table, his face a mix of hope and anxiety. "You did great," she reassured him, offering a supportive smile. The tension in the air was thick as they waited for the jury's decision. Emily could hear the murmurs from the gallery, where spectators whispered among themselves, discussing the trial and the implications of the testimony they had just witnessed. She noticed several people nodding in agreement with her points, their expressions reflecting a growing awareness of the issues at hand. As the minutes ticked by, Emily's mind raced. She thought about the broader implications of the case, how it highlighted the systemic biases that people of color often face in their interactions with law enforcement. She hoped that her efforts would not only help Jason but also contribute to a greater dialogue about justice and accountability. Finally, the jury returned, their expressions serious. Judge Mitchell called the courtroom to order, and everyone held their breath as the four persons stood to deliver the verdict. "We find the defendant not guilty of all charges." A wave of relief washed over Emily, and she turned to Jason, whose eyes widened in disbelief before breaking into a grin. The gallery erupted in quiet murmurs of surprise and excitement, some people clapping softly while others exchanged looks of affirmation. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes as she embraced Jason. "You did it! You're free!" she exclaimed, overwhelmed with emotion. Judge Mitchell banged his gavel to restore order. "Charges are dismissed. Court is adjourned." As the gavel struck, the gravity of the moment settled in. Emily had not only secured justice for her client, but had also challenged the status quo. As they exited the courthouse, cameras flashed all around them. Reporters crowded around, eager to capture Emily's thoughts on the case. One journalist stepped forward, microphone in hand. "Emily, how does it feel to win such a pivotal case at your age?" She paused, taking a deep breath. "I'm not here to feel good about winning," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm here to make things right and to highlight the need for change in our justice system." That evening, as she sat down for dinner with Jason at a nearby cafe, the buzz of the day still echoed in her mind. Jason couldn't stop shaking from the adrenaline. "I thought they'd find a way to spin it," he said, his voice cracking with relief. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "This isn't just about winning a case," she explained. "It's about ensuring that every person feels safe and respected under the law. It's about making sure that the next person has a voice, and that we hold the system accountable." As their conversation flowed, Emily reflected on the journey ahead. She knew that the fight for justice was far from over. The attention on her case had the potential to spark change, not just for individuals like Jason, but for countless others facing similar injustices. In the days that followed, Emily's phone buzzed with messages and requests for interviews. Her closing argument had gone viral, igniting discussions on social media about systemic bias and the importance of accountability in law enforcement. As she read through the messages of support, one particularly struck her. A mother wrote that her daughter, inspired by Emily's performance in court, now wanted to pursue a career in law. Emily smiled, knowing that her efforts could inspire the next generation to challenge the norms and fight for justice. With this newfound recognition came a responsibility. Emily understood that her role as an advocate extended beyond the courtroom. She was determined to continue her work, pushing for reforms that would ensure justice for all, one case at a time. The sun set on that transformative day, but for Emily Harper, it was just the beginning of her journey toward creating a more equitable future.